Okay, Chair, you're good to go. Thank you.
I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of November 29th, 2021 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Mikulik, Councillor and Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom during this declared emergency period. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. Roll call. I will ask our Deputy Clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton?
I see her. She's here.
I'm sorry.
And
I am here. Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Rajima? Here. Councillor and Deputy Mayor Russell?
Here.
Councillor Bernay?
Here.
Councillor Pachariva?
Here.
Councillor McPherson?
Here.
Councillor Mikulik?
Here.
Councillor Reimer?
Here.
And Councillor Timmers is absent from tonight's meeting and does send her regrets. However, we do have quorum.
Thank you. In addition, I want to take a moment to welcome the staff we have joining us today electronically. Chief Administrative Officer Michael Kirkopoulos, Director of Finance, Administration and Innovation, Lawrence Wagner, Associate Director of Finance, Terry Trewalla, Director of Legislative Services, Town Clerk, Julie Kirklos, Director of Planning and Development, Matt Bruder, Manager of Prudence and Special Product Checks, Melissa Shee, Associate Director, Recreation and Culture, Sarah Ain, Director of Economic Development and Communications, Paul Gianni, Economic Development Assistant, Cameron Rotz, Director of Public Works, David Graham, Associate Director of Public Works, Jillian Harris, Manager of Capital and Infrastructure Projects, Walter Neubauer, Fire Chief Greg Hudson, Emergency Management Coordinator, Kathy McGrath, Legislative Committee Coordinator, Deanna Phillips, and moderating and clerking the meeting today, we have our Manager of Legislative Services, Deputy Clerk Devan Kripp. IT staff are in attendance. Also in attendance, we have Matt Johnston, Urban Solutions Planning and Land Development Consultants, Brandon Petter, Urban Solutions Planning and Land Development Consultants, Andrew Boles, J.R. Corey, Michael Clark, Ross Cronkright. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during this electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption of the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and/or deputy clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the deputy clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up to 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair, Councillor Bernay, will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their role. Each member of council who wishes to speak, press the raise hand feature on your video call and the deputy clerk will track our speakers list and then invite you to speak when I open it up for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announcing the mover, the deputy clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourselves off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I see none. Confirmation of agenda. Do members have any amendments to the order of the agenda? See any? Okay, statutory public meetings. We have one statutory public meeting this evening. The purpose of the statutory public meeting is to receive comments from the public and consider questions regarding a zoning bylaw amendment application by Urban Solutions Planning and Land Development Consultants. We will consider the staff report associated with the item immediately after the statutory public meeting. Section 17/15 and 34/12 of the Planning Act requires that before adopting an official plan and before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, Council must ensure that sufficient information and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered, and council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the general public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendments. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at the public meeting or makes written submissions to the town of Lincoln before the amendments are approved, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the town of Lincoln to the Ontario Land Tribunal, or the OLT. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and may be considered as an appendix to a staff report published in the meeting agenda, delegation list, and/or minutes of the public meeting that are made public, part of the public record. The town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of council's decisions. It may also be used to serve notice of an Ontario Land Tribunal, or OLT, hearing. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests that the town remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Our public meeting is for the purpose of zoning bylaw amendment application by Urban Solutions Planning and Land Development Consultants. Once we have received the presentation and delegations, we will proceed directly into the report. I will now ask Matt Johnston and Brandon Petter from Urban Solutions to proceed with the presentation. As a reminder, you have up to 10 minutes. Matt, Brandon.
Good evening, members of committee, staff, and the public. My name is Matt Johnston, a registered professional planner with Urban Solutions. And today it's my privilege to be here on behalf of Desantis Homes. Is now a good time for the clerk to share the presentation?
I will share the presentation. Please just let me know if you can see it and when to advance the slide.
Great, thank you.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Perfect.
So yes, as I mentioned, it's great to be in front of you tonight. Representing Desantis Homes really is a privilege, and you know it's great for me to be back in Beansville, where it's been quite some time since I was here again with Desantis Homes on the redevelopment of the fairgrounds. That may predate some of you, but what I remember most is how engaged the community was. You know, we filled council chambers on a number of evenings, and in the end, that level of engagement really resulted in what I think is a better plan for the community. Desantis Homes is a great community partner. The outcome of that fairgrounds development was, you know, really the great Fleming Center that's now open and operational. They're a constant community supporter with things like the Ice Wine Festival. All of this is what makes Desantis Homes a great community partner to work with and bring developments like the one we have before you forward this evening. So again, thanks for participating. I'd like to first quickly thank Matt Bruder and Melissa Shee for their guidance and assistance to date. And also I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of Brendan Petter of our team for helping bring this file along. Next slide, please. For the agenda, we're going to quickly just walk you through the subject lands, provide a detailed overview of the development proposal, along with an overview of the applicable policy framework, and then be available for any questions. Next slide, please. So the subject lands are at the northeast corner of Green Lane and Ontario Street, directly south of the rail corridor. This image shows that what we typically think of the lands at the northeast corner. The parcel, while we say it's the northeast corner, it's important to understand there is a second piece of land between us and Ontario Street, and those lands are owned by the region that don't actually form part of the right-of-way. The parcel itself is just over 1.5 hectares or 3.7 acres and are currently vacant. Next slide, please. A little further beyond, we have the industrial area to the north on the north side of the rail corridor leading up to the Queen Elizabeth Way. At the northwest corner, we have the future site of the GO Transit extension. To the south, we have the existing residential community with the commercial plaza directly to our west. And as you all know, downtown is a little further down the street, south on Ontario. Next slide, please. Melissa, I've got to thank you for this slide. We borrowed a little bit of your previous work. I thought it was a great one just to really highlight where we are in the process. The applications were first submitted in June of this year, followed by our virtual open house that was held in August. Following the open house and the circulation to town departments and the region, we took that feedback and it resulted in specific changes to the application that were ultimately resubmitted on October 14th of this year. That's what ultimately led us to our first statutory public meeting here tonight, and we look forward to working with staff on a recommendation report following this public meeting. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the submission that was made in October was in direct, incorporated direct feedback from the community and from staff that we feel went a long way to address concerns that were raised. So initially, we had a 10-story building in its entirety, and we did hear the concerns related to height. So what we did was really we sculpted that height in a different format. We still have a 10-story component right at Ontario Street, but then it drops down to 8 stories along the balance of Green Lane. We did hear concerns about density, and our response there is really we held the unit count the same because we really do have new provincial policies, a new growth plan with updated intensification targets that we felt that the unit count was important to hold. From a traffic perspective, we heard concerns raised over overall increase in traffic. We do have a supporting study along these lines, but what we also did was include a number of changes to Green Lane to improve the interface there. And another important element from the staff perspective was a lack of commercial space. And what we did was really work hard to innovate a mixed use zone that allows some flexibility in that commercial space where we have a certain amount of fixed dedicated commercial space, and then we have units that will have a flexible component to them. So that submission was again filed in October of this year. And in addition to the change in the building height, this revised plan also went a long way in terms of introducing additional step backs and setbacks that weren't incorporated in the initial version. And those changes in the facade go a long way in terms of alleviating some of the height and massing concerns. Next slide, please. So here we have on the left-hand side, in the more pinkish orange hue, we've got our 10-story component, and then we can see how it transitions down to the 8-story as you move west. The yellow incorporates or really illustrates the building step backs, and you can also really see the variation in the facade material. Next slide, please. This slide here shows a number of the elements that really make the plan work together. We've got our mixed use component. We have lay-by parking proposed along Green Lane. We have enhanced landscaping along both the Ontario Street frontage and the Green Lane frontage. And then we also have a significant amount of underground parking. Next slide, please. Here we have our building elevation. And again, the difference in the material also correlates with some of the building step backs. So this really illustrates distinct components of the building where some of these residential units are walkout, bringing some activity to the street line, in addition to the commercial program space. All of which work really together to ensure that the pedestrian scale of the building remains appropriate. Next slide. Here we have a rendering of the building looking to the northeast from Ontario and Green Lane. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, we talked about some of the traffic concerns. And what this slide shows here is a real enhancement to the Green Lane interface where we have the introduction of bike lane, sidewalks, plus the lay-by parking, which will really create a more pedestrian feel to the street and ensuring that the transition of building height is appropriate. Next slide. Here we're showing essentially the same view, but we've got, we're on the east end of the site here. And what's really most important to highlight here is the triangular portion that that I'll touch on shortly, a privately owned public space that serves as an important component of the development. Next slide. From a landscape perspective, what we've proposed here is really a collaborative approach to how the land owned by the region would be enhanced. Again, it is a regional road, but the lands in question are actually a separate parcel. And I'll elaborate on this further, but we've really teamed with Vineland Research Innovation Center, who are really experts in the field of ensuring that the landscaping that we do really flourishes. So the partnership with their input on the regional road, on the regionally owned lands, is really a way to create that focal point of the Ontario Street and Green Lane intersection. The enhancement reminds us a little bit about the previous work that Desantis has done further close to downtown, where we introduced the masonry wall at the Tim Hortons location out in that public right-of-way. Another kind of similar approach where we can enhance lands off-site that overall go a long way to really improving and realizing the vision of the Ontario Street corridor. Next slide, please. This one here shows a closer detail of the pedestrian walkouts from the various units at grade. Again, bringing a real pedestrian element to the taller building. Next slide. And here we come back to the privately owned public space. This area is an important element in that it's really going to be a dual purpose portion of the property where it, again, will be privately owned, meaning it'll form part of the condominium, but the condominium declaration will recognize and welcome the public to utilize the green space. Both of the Ontario Street component with the region and the pop space, as we like to call it, are really elements that will be secured and implemented through the site plan stage. Next slide, please. This slide here is an important one in that we really just wanted to quickly highlight the importance of the CN rail component as a real driving force for the balance of the concept. So while you're abutting the CN lands come some pretty strict requirements. And here the main issue is the 30-meter setback for any buildings or structures. Parking underground is all permitted, but the building itself must respect that 30 meters. So you can really see we've got a triangular property from the onset. Then you add on the 30-meter setback from the corridor. And that's really what you're left with for your building envelope. So it's important to understand that just in terms of the implications on the overall site layout and how to use that as an advantage and recognize it as a bit of a constraint at the same time. Next slide, please.
My apologies. I just want to say you have a minute left. I know it's quite the project that you're presenting, but
Sure.
with time.
I've got a few slides left, but I'll roll through them really quickly. So with an application like this, many will be familiar. There's a policy framework in place that helps us to evaluate it. And with the help of the clerk, I'll roll through these quickly. So at the regional OP level, we've got a built-up area designation. Next slide. We've got our Town of Lincoln official plan, where we have a central commercial designation. Plus, we're subject to the Ontario Street guidelines. Next slide. We also have the Beansville Go secondary plan. I touched on that earlier. It's essentially kitty corner to the subject lands where the future Go station is. A policy framework that strives to take advantage of our underutilized parcels and intensify. Next slide. Here we have another element of the secondary plan. Next slide. So I know I'm getting tight on time. Here we have our existing zoning, and essentially what we're doing is proposing a site-specific zone that will build on the existing zoning, but provide specific constraints or specific controls that will ensure that the massing proposed is ultimately secured through the site plan stage. Next slide. And with the application, we have a gauntlet of supporting studies to ensure that everything is technically sound. They're all on the screen here, but I'll touch on some of the important components: the urban design brief, traffic study, pedestrian wind study, functional servicing from an engineering perspective, sun shadow, noise and vibration, land use compatibility. So all of these studies were submitted in support of the application and reviewed by the various departments and agencies. And collectively with that, the next slide, please. I've got a highlight of the chronology that I touched on a little bit earlier. But essentially what we've done as a project team is really try to respond to the feedback that we heard. And the feedback was about massing. The feedback was about how this tall building can be accommodated. And we made specific improvements that I touched on to introduce a 10 to 8-story tier, to introduce a building step back to again alleviate some of that massing concern. And that submission is now under review leading to today's public meeting. Ultimately, as we know, we'll need a recommendation report, and we expect that to come in short order. Now, the last point I'd like to touch on, we did have our microsite, thank you, where what we did was post all of the supporting studies online. And we've allowed, I think back when we first did the fairgrounds, we were dropping stuff off like this at the library. Nowadays, we can easily post it online. And here you can get an idea of the activity. So it's been a well-utilized site, giving access to your constituents and area residents. And I think with that, I'd like to, I think it was one slide. Can I go to the next slide? Yes.
You got 10 seconds. 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Community benefits. It's a question that we hear often. What do we get out of the development? In this case, I've got them on the screen here and would be glad to kind of elaborate on them through a Q&A period. But I think overall, the changes that were made were in response to the feedback. There are a number of community benefits that the community will realize through a development like this one. And when we combine all those together, I think we have an application that really does represent good planning. We're implementing the provincial and the local policy framework. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
My apologies, Matt. It's quite the project, and I can sense your passion with the project, and I do appreciate that. It's just we got a lot on this agenda this evening. So
I knew the 10-minute agenda, and I knew I would be close, but I think I covered off the most poignant components. So
you did well.
to answer any questions.
Okay, so we will be considering the staff report after the delegations. However, do members of council have any questions for the consultant or the proponents? I see Councillor Brunet had his hand up first.
Thank you, Chair Michalak. Through you to the presenter. Matt, you've mentioned a number of times that your applicant, your client has made some changes from the initial application. And you mentioned in the onset before you went to the slides that you've reacted by going to a 10 to an 8-story tiered building, but you had made a decision based on provincial new target that your numbers of units were staying the same. So my question through you, Chair, to Mr. Johnston is, we also heard on the preliminary a number of concerns about parking. We hear it on every application. We hear it across. It's not just in Lincoln, it's everywhere. So what, if any, changes have you made to the parking spaces on this application?
So through the chair, thank you for the good questions, Councillor. So yes, essentially we did hold the line at the overall unit count of 370. From a parking perspective, we did increase that amount to 450 parking spaces. So we're not looking for relief. We're really looking, we've got a surplus of parking that's really intended to capture that demand. And there's when you provide parking at that rate, it really does result in a different type of attraction to the users. So what we see here is a product that will really speak to local home ownership at a both at an entry and an empty nester level. And the parking at 450 spaces was sort of a key element to that.
Councillor?
Yeah, so just to be clear, the 450, if I understand the report, so you've got 370 units. You've got 401 residential spaces. You've got 38 visitor spaces, and you've got 11 commercial spaces. Is that correct? Is that how you come up with the 450?
That's correct.
And you think that's enough?
Certainly. As I mentioned, it's when we provide parking at that rate, it's relatively high at today's standard for this type of built form. And I think one of the attractions to that is that it, like I said, it'll really attract owner occupied units and purchasers, something that you don't always see when you see proposals with a more reduced rate.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that, but what becomes frustrating is when we continue to hear that all developers want to push the envelope on densification, and yet you're not willing to look at additional parking spaces. That becomes frustrating. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get into a parking debate. Through you, Chair, if I could just continue, just for some clarification purposes, Mr. Johnston, I'm wondering, you said that our staff had come back to you with some concerns about the lack of commercial space from your first application. So I'm just wondering, I'm just looking for clarification. So you mentioned in your presentation some mixed use, and then you said, and some units with a flexible component. So then in the slides, I see 3 commercial units in addition to flex space. So could you just kind of explain, like, for our residents, what they can expect in terms of commercial space in this development, just for clarity?
Certainly, thank you. So through the chair, what we did was increase the commercial space to introduce that mixed use element. there was concerns about getting the balance quite right. So what we did was we worked with Desantis Homes at other options to provide a comfort level that what we were going to be providing was indeed viable. And that's what led to the fixed amount of commercial space. Then the terminology, the flex space that we're referring to is these units at grade that will have that walkout component where some may utilize that commercial ability, while others may look like a traditional residential unit. But you'll get potential personal service type operators who might go in there. I can think of one that I've been to. There was a tailor operating with a very similar style building, and that's kind of the flex zoning that would be accommodated, where that ground floor element could welcome customers, or it could just be private space like any other ground floor residential condominium unit.
Counselor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Through you, Chair, if I could just ask a third question. Through you, Chair, Mr. Johnston, we certainly appreciate working with your client on other projects in the past. One of those that we did with your client specifically in the Lincoln Square area incorporated a portion of what was deemed based on the regional threshold to be affordable housing. And we certainly appreciate that as we try to listen to our residents who want to stay in our community and live in our community. And with housing costs rising, we certainly appreciate the affordable housing component that was offered in that build in the past. Is there anything in this build, in this application that speaks to affordable housing that your developer is willing to bring to the table?
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you. Through the chair, the affordability component is certainly at the top of mind for all. And the short answer would be there's no direct affordability component program, so to speak, in place at this time. But what this application does is really introduce a built form, a unit type, a product that will be affordable in comparison. A varied available supply of housing, whether from traditional singles to towns to units like this, is an important element to the affordability discussion. If those discussions proceed more along the lines of the previous example, that's something that we could talk about. But at this point, it's really just a varied built form that would contribute and alleviate some of the housing pressure. Thank you.
Councilor Brunei?
Yeah, so I appreciate that comment, and I do, your comment resonates that it's high on your priority list. And so I would hope that those lines of communication would remain open as we deal with the application moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Brunei. Appreciate your questions. Councilor Rinchema, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions through to the presenter about the report states that the wind study identified uncomfortable spots or something like that. I might not be using the right terminology, but has this been considered in the redesign that was submitted in October? And if so, what changed?
So through the chair, thank you for the question. The pedestrian wind study was updated in response to the revised building. And actually the introduction of the building step backs was a key part in mitigating some of the wind concerns. So the initial proposal, with a few exceptions, was predominantly straight up 10 stories from sidewalk to the rooftop. Through the introduction of the building step back that was shown on, there's that podium element at grade, and then the building is further recessed back for the balance of the height. that goes a long way to mitigate the wind concerns. And again, the site plan process would also provide an opportunity to introduce any other mitigation measures that might be needed to ensure that all is in order.
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, also the report says that the noise and vibration study was revised. To what extent was it revised and why?
Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. The noise and vibration was actually really revised to address concerns that were identified from the industrial area to the north, where there were a number of inputs from into the noise study. Some of it was from the rail, others were from specific industrial operators on the north side of the tracks, where their environmental certificates to operate, most of them were recognized, but there were one or two that were not. So we had to kind of go revisit that to make sure that all of the users and operators on the north side there were appropriately accounted for. So I believe that was one of the main reasons for the revisions.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chair, one more question through you.
Go ahead.
I just want to clarify something Councillor Brunet was asking about the what's required in terms of commercial space on the main floor. So I'm looking at the report and it says that our zoning bylaw says that dwelling units may be permitted on the ground floor provided they do not occupy more than 50% of the ground floor, and that the proposed change is that dwelling units may occupy 70% of the ground floor, no more than 70% of the ground floor. And so the flexible units that you're talking about, those are sort of something that you're proposing to provide that would sort of make up for that 20% increase in permissible dwelling units. You'd have some other units that would be flexible over and above that. Is that right?
That's right. So the flex space is really just that. So some owners may really find that attractive and take full advantage of that commercial opportunity, while others may not. And sorry, Councillor, a second component to your last question just came to mind, again, regarding noise and revisions, and it related to noise in some of the amenity spaces. So the revised building design actually incorporated some of the concerns related to noise. So it was there were a few moving parts to that noise update. So I just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. And a clarification question, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, on my last question about commercial units on the main floor.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm not sure if it's necessary, really, this particular site-specific amendment, because I think that there's a significant amount of density in this development. And I know it's something that we feel is important to have a sufficient amount of commercial space at grade in the long run. And so I'm questioning the need for that. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit, but I'm not completely comfortable with that particular aspect of the site-specific zoning.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, by not being comfortable, I'm taking it that you'd like to see it as a requirement, as take away the flexibility and to require the commercial floor space.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for clarifying. So it was an area that we studied quite closely, and there were a number of sort of key factors that made us reluctant to accept commercial across the entire floor area at grade. And one of them, the key components, is that the property is really fronting Green Lane. It does have exposure to Ontario Street, but it doesn't have enough to really garner the visibility and the access that commercial operators would really demand. So when we look at the orientation of the site, we are introducing the laybys to help support that commercial element and to make it more attractive to utilize the flexible zoning. but at the same time, it's really important to animate that space. And the concern would be if we have struggling commercial areas that wouldn't be realized, that wouldn't be achieved. So the ground floor units received a lot of attention on the redesign to ensure that each unit is a walkout. It's not a traditional unit where you're only going to access it from the interior corridor. So that design element helps serve the commercial purpose. You know, one of the reasons we want mixed use buildings from a planning perspective is to really animate the street. But in this case, we came up with the flexible zoning to with direct access to the street to ensure that the street is animated in the event that it's not commercial. So we really tried to kind of balance objectives, and I think we came up with a creative approach with the flexible zoning, one that has been utilized and typically well taken advantage of. So.
Okay, I'm still remain concerned about that. I'd like to see it sort of commercial and commercial. I'd like to see this proposal meet that zoning requirement that 50%, no more than 50% be residential on the main floor. But I do appreciate your presentation and explaining your motivations for that request. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Comments and hopes are noted. Deputy Mayor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Johnston. Just taking a look at the overhead and trying to get the orientation on Green Lane. I know that this proposal requires a widening of Green Lane. Those new parking spaces that are added on the Green Lane streetscape, are those on your property or are those on town property?
Those do form part of the right of way.
So the widening, through you, Mr. Chair, the widening of the road, would that be all on the north side of Green Lane, or would it also require the property owners on the south side to lose part of their frontage?
Through the chair, that's a dedication on the north side only.
Okay. Thank you. And last question, Mr. Chair. When you mentioned the density of this and meeting the provincial requirements, could you just give us a quick overview of what the density targets are of this property and whether or not this current form being a 10-story to 8-story, is there a minimum or a maximum that it hits in terms of density, or is it if you were to lower this building, would you still be able to hit those minimum requirements?
Certainly. Let me just find my correct notes to help ensure I get my figures straight. Okay, so we're coming in at 296 units per hectare. Now, we do actually exceed the current requirements, but those current requirements were established prior to updates to the growth plan, and that's where I suggested that, you know, the modest increase that we're looking for to go to the 296 units per hectare is really in response to that. So, you know, had the secondary plan associated with the future GO station and the balance of the planning documents been completed post 2020 growth plan, then we may see density requirements within those documents that are more in keeping with the fresher directives of the province. So at coming in at 296, yes, it is over the current standard. But again, I'd suggest that it's appropriate to go over the current standard as it is a bit of a stale dated metric in comparison to the more recent planning documents from the province.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Just a clarification, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
What is that, the current standard? Again, you said you're over it. What is the current standard?
So it's 200.
200, so you're almost 50% over.
That's fair to say. Um, and I'm just double checking my math here to, to translate that into actual units. So the additional 96 units per hectare translates to about 118 units.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll come back in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Matt, for the presentation. I'm going to pick up on a couple of the topics that have already been discussed. And I'm going to hold a couple of questions with regards to community benefits and the POPS, I believe, or POPs, till we get the report. But I want to talk about parking a little bit, and you know, I'm just struggling with the whole thought of 1 car per unit, and thinking about you know, our town, and thinking about our employment picture here, and you know, our current transportation master plan that was done in 2019 showed that we were actually higher per average household in parking than the region, than the average through the region, and we are in excess of 2 cars per household. And I grant you that that is all of Lincoln, and that does take into consideration, of course, houses. But I did, you know, some very basic math here. And if you look at the 370 units that you're proposing, if half of those had 2 cars, we would need 550 spaces. 555 spaces just for the units. We're not talking about visitor parking. We're not talking about commercial yet, but 555 spaces if in fact half of the 370 had 2 cars. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Certainly, thank you. Through the chair, you know, parking is it's one of those things that is really the driving force behind a lot of our planning decisions today. You know, and there's really 2 camps of people out there. I appreciate that you acknowledge that the built form in terms of how Lincoln compares to the balance of the region is really based on the built form, where the numbers that would form that metric really are derived from a community that's really essentially predominantly all singles at this point. But the makeup of the community is certainly changing. It's trending to a more dense style of development. And I think one of the kind of key elements to buildings like this one that are registered condominiums is that, you know, the parking, I'd like to say, is really self-regulating. The purchasers buy a unit with an understanding of the fact that it comes with 1 space. If you're a multi-car family, this isn't the product for you. This isn't the building for you. And it really translates into the buyers that are attracted to the site. So I think that condominium control is one that the town can take comfort in to ensure that the on-site parking demand is met and not exceeded.
Well, thank you for that. And it's interesting that the comment you just made, we have heard before in a different development, that you know, if you want to buy one of these, don't come with 2 cars. So you know, I don't think you or me or anybody's going to be able to dictate who buys these places, and it is really, you know, the market will tell who's going to purchase these and how many cars or vehicles they're going to bring. So I just want to move on. Thank you for that, Matt. I want to hit on the commercial space a little bit, and I wonder if there was consideration given for building the or aligning the building with the sidewalk, and and giving commercial space a much better chance of success. If you were to push the building right against the sidewalk, this, as you know, as we know, is part of the intensification corridor.
Shit.
Is also, within the secondary plan for the GO station. And so having commercial along that ground floor, 10 years from now, I think will be a completely different picture than looking at it today with what we have in the area today. So I wonder if you could speak to that, if there was consideration given to moving the building right up against the sidewalk to give it more of a downtown feel, if you will.
Thank you. Through the chair, the location of the commercial space was certainly the topic of a lot of discussion. One of the questions really related to Ontario Street and what that interface is like, and really with the lands being owned by the region, it is there for a potential grade change between an underpass overpass scenario with the rail corridor. And with that element at play, it really creates concerns for introducing a commercial element that wouldn't really have the traditional access to the street at grade because of that long-term potential change. So that's what really pushed it over to Green Lane and off of Ontario. In terms of its location on Green Lane, what we wanted to do was alleviate some of the congestion right at the intersection of Ontario. So that really pushed it to the east of the site. That eastern location of the building gives it best access to parking and a better circulation from a traffic perspective. So that was some of the driving forces to why the commercial fixed space is located where it is.
Well, and thank you for that, Matt. And I would suggest that in alignment with Councillor Regima, that you reconsider that you look at the commercial space that you've got there. I would think, and I'm certainly not a planner, but I would think that the commercial space pushed well off of Ontario Street back in the corner of this building is going to struggle without other commercial space tied to it. So, the fact that it's well off Ontario Street and, is not visible, let's say, to people passing down Ontario Street is going to present its own problems. So thank you, Matt. And I will come back if there's any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Appreciate your comments and questions. Councillor Pachariva.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt, just a point going forward, still probably a good idea to drop off copies at the library. The Fleming Center, especially during the pandemic, has been a bit of a hub. And we've got a report later on in our package tonight dealing with the broadband. And not everyone has internet, and those that do experience slowness with it. So maybe going forward, reach out to our CEO at the library and get a copy there. So just a couple questions through you, Mr. Chairman. The angular plane analysis that's done. So it shows a 45-degree angle at 80%, but the building encroaches on the 8th floor and above. So any talk of possibly stepping back those 2 floors to meet the encroachment requirement, but at the same time maintaining the current parking level?
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, the angular plane test just quickly is a good planning tool to help understand the massing of any building.
Mm-hmm.
The there are infringements on it, as you pointed out. And what my response, and I'll elaborate a bit more, what we did was we did take steps to improve that angular plane. So as I mentioned, the initial proposal was 10 across the board. We've now introduced building step backs and a reduction in height for much of the frontage to alleviate that concern. And the reason that I'd suggest it's okay to breach the plane in this particular instance is that it's really a tool to help primarily protect private amenity areas and overview from that perspective. So when we have our neighbors on the south side of Green Lane, we have a front yard interface where if you're enjoying your backyard amenity, you'll be the building will be compliant to the angular plane from where you're really, again, enjoying your private amenity space. So we're sort of balancing the objectives to, because it's that public interface as opposed to a private amenity, that we're asking for a little bit of relief from that typical guideline.
Okay. And my second question, Mr. Chairman, through you, Matt, you had mentioned that after the first public meeting in July that you went back and did a little redesign and you dropped, so it's now not a 10-story building right across, it's a 10 with a step down to an 8. But you maintain the number of dwelling units. But the issue that's front and center to me is now your 1 bedroom and your bachelors are the same size. Both 45 square meters. So, and again, I mean, I appreciate, wanting to maintain the number, but by, having a little give and take here, I think it would allow them to be the proper size. Just your comments on that.
Thank you. So, there were a few things done to reallocate some of the overall floor area. So we certainly lost or reduced floor area to accommodate the reductions. When I hear your comment about the 1 and 1 bedroom being the same, I can highlight that they are different. So our 1 bedrooms are between 500 and 570 square feet. The 1 plus den are over 630 to 675. So there is a difference in the size there. But the unit composition again is trying to introduce a built form of product that's currently not readily available in the town, and those unit sizes are intended to attract those purchasers.
Okay. Yeah, I saw the difference between the 1 and the 2 bedroom, but it's showing that the 1 and the bachelor is the same. So, and just my last question, and again, the other councilors have touched on it, commercial. We see a lot of the commentary about adding all these people and where are they going to shop. And I think by maintaining, a good commercial component to the bottom floor would create a bit of a buzz, possibly attracting, an anchor tenant that's currently maybe shoehorned in further up Ontario Street, which has its own problems, would actually be beneficial to this development. So I'm wondering if you've had, and I know it's, you probably can't say per se, but have any of those discussions taken place?
Thank you. So through the chair, I do appreciate the common knowledge that mixed use buildings are what we should be striving for when we talk about density. But we are also experiencing a real fundamental shift in the way people shop. And, some of that's reflected in the amount of floor area that we're talking about here. So what we look at this building doing is really being an influx of users to go and not compete with the downtown core floor space, not to compete compete with the commercial space opposite us on Ontario, but rather be an influx of users to patron those stores and to really invigorate, some of the energy in the existing commercial areas. Commercial space is one of those things that when the demand is really there, they'll take full advantage and find ways to adapt. We've got the larger center on the northwest corner there. It too in the coming years will be ripe for a retake on how it functions. And the thought is with this site located where it is, not that true direct frontage on Ontario, that we had to come up with a way to bring the activity to the street that comes with commercial space. We traded that for ground floor units with direct access. So again, are we seeking relief? Yes, but we're not doing it and turning our eye to the street. We're doing it in a way that really still animates the street with all the types of activity that commercial uses do, but just without that committed GFA. So those are all sort of some of the things that were in our thought process in terms of landing at the space that we did provide. Okay,
just in just as a kind of follow up to that, just a reminder that there's the CN crossing there, and there's a signalized intersection where vehicles will be stopped, and a look to the right to where your development is proposed, and with the right anchor tenant would be advertising itself a few times a day. So just food for thought. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, further questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for allowing me to come back in. Mr. Johnston, again, thanks for coming again tonight. I don't want my comments to come across as not as being unappreciative for your presentation and what you guys are trying to do. But over the last little while, there's been some uneasiness in the community about how developers come in and seemingly ignore the secondary plans that the towns, our town in particular, have put in place. And another development, not yours, but again, has raised the ire to a number of people, including myself, about this happening. And again, I see that obviously you are 4 stories above our secondary plan. Again, I know we're trying to say it's a 10-story with it drops down to an 8, but it's still a 10-story. So we're still 4 stories above what our secondary plan is. And as Councillor Pachariva mentioned, the unit size is actually also about 20% smaller in some cases of what is required in our secondary plan. Why is it a requirement that, or why is it necessary that developers seem to be going well above and beyond our secondary plans when these should be the standard that they're measured against?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through the chair, I'm involved in a number of applications similar to this. It's certainly this type of built form we're seeing more and more, across the Golden Horseshoe, and I'm involved in a number of them. And many of the locations where we're doing this this type of development don't have current secondary plans that reflect the current provincial initiatives. And I understand it's hard to keep up because the province has been evolving some of their growth plan methodologies and rolling things out on a never-ending basis. So in that sense, it's fair that not to expect all the documents like your secondary plans to be totally current. But I think what the development industry is doing is really simply trying to respond to the overall housing crisis and the affordability crisis, where there is a real direct correlation to the price point and unit size. And the only way to bring projects like this on to fruition is to ensure you bring them on stream at a point that is affordable or a new term, more attainable.
Vincent was just calling.
Sorry. So, there's a bit of a gap between the provincial policy framework and the local policy framework. And then we've got, the important pricing point that the unit sizes, generally reflect. So I think that if we don't consider applications that look for these increases, we'll continue to struggle to see the visions of these secondary plans realized in the first place. So they've got to be viewed as sort of a living, breathing document. And when we look at increases, we can't just look at the metric. We have to look, really closely at, yes, we're going from 6 to 8 to a 10-story. And we say, what are the land use impacts when we look for these types of changes? So are we asking for an increase? Yes, we are. But are there, the real test comes down to compatibility and adverse impact. And, that's really a key decision in terms of, hey, well, if we can accommodate these additional units and provide some of that relief on availability, and we can do it without adverse impact, then I'd suggest that it's the appropriate step to make and to provide that relief on heightened density. This site lends itself well to that type of relief because its neighbors to the north are a rail corridor, because it's on your prime corridor to the QEW and the future GO transit station. So it's attractive in that sense, and it begs for a little bit more density, a little bit of relief, and it's a good candidate site to accommodate it.
Okay. I appreciate that. And one follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Sure, as long as it's a new subject or topic.
So from a resident's perspective, what it looks like to most is, and again, I know it's no fault of your own because you are in the process that you're in, but the buildings seem to be getting higher and higher. The units seem to be getting smaller and smaller. And when we talk about affordability, we're really looking at price per unit, not necessarily price per square foot. So the concerning trend is as these buildings get larger, units get smaller, price more or less probably stays the same, but the actual square footage price drops considerably or increases considerably. So really, again, affordability, I guess it's a bit of a moot point that yes, you can maybe buy into a market, but at the same time, what you're buying now is going to be much smaller, much less useful for what we hope to be growing families in Lincoln down the road than what maybe you might have been able to get 5 or 10 years ago. And it's a growing concern. But again, I'm just wondering at what point, and maybe it's not, maybe it's a question for staff. So I'll pull back out of that one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No problem. If I could, it reminds me of my parents when I bought my first townhouse, and they said, "You're paying $250,000 for a townhouse," and I think that speaks to just that wasn't as long ago as some might think either. But the housing affordability discussion is one that's much more broad than any one particular development application. But these individual applications really do contribute to that varied built form that doesn't exist. And when you don't have that, you have more pressure on the balance of the housing stock. So I think it really is important to accommodate this type of built form and give some relief in that sense. So
Appreciate your perspective on that. Councilor McPherson, I see.
Thank you, Mr. or Councilor Michalek, Chair Michalek. Just a quick question, and it's along those lines through you to Mr. Johnson. And I'm wondering if you can comment through your experience on, you're talking a lot about affordability or attainability, and I'm wondering if you could share with us your thoughts on a single person going in or a family going in and living in these units versus an investor coming along and seeing an opportunity and using the unit as possibly a rental operate or unit over maybe a period of time, or maybe somewhat of an Airbnb. I wonder if you could comment on what you're seeing when it comes to these buildings actually going for sale and who's buying them.
Johnson.
Thank you for the good question. You know, owner-occupied units, I think, is what many would prefer to see. Will some of these be purchased by an investor? You know, certainly. There's not a direct control mechanism, but one of the ways to control that is through providing a livable building. You know, one that people do want to live in. And how do you do that? You don't reduce your parking below 1-to-1 like many of the developments on our neighbors between us in Grimsby, where you get reduced parking ratios in buildings like this, an instant draw to investors. You have this public, the POP space. There's an element to that POP space that comes with significant costs and carrying costs to the condominium corporation. There's rooftop amenity, ground floor amenity. All of these things kind of come together to deliver a product that people actually want to live in, and it comes with an increased cost to carry those amenities. So it's those buildings that don't have those elements that you know, they come with much more lower condominium fees, an instant draw to the investor. So I think when you're dealing with a partner like Homes by Desantis, you're getting a quality of building design that people are willing to pay extra for. You're getting amenity-rich buildings that people are willing to pay for because they want to live there. Will they, you know, will there be some entry level? Yes, and their families will grow and they'll grow to a point where they need to move on. Well, ideally, they'll stay in the community, and it'll be that transitional form of housing for them, a key stepping stone to getting their families in place. So I think that's probably the best control mechanism that you can have is just amenity-rich buildings, high quality that you can certainly expect from Homes by Desantis.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Johnson, for that presentation.
Thank you.
Just for everybody that is participating in this meeting, to make sure you are on mute. There's been some interesting feedback that we overheard, and this is a different way of doing things and not standard, but if we could remind ourselves to be on mute. There being no further questions of the presenters, I have a motion moved by Councillor Brunet that Councillor receive for file for information the following presentation from Matt Johnson and Brandon Petter of Urban Solutions regarding item 5.1, zoning bylaw amendment, application by Urban Solutions Planning and Land Development Consultants. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brunet,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Regima,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton. Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt and Brandon. Look forward to you working with town staff and taking these comments raised by council under consideration. We have 4 individuals that requested to be included in this public hearing. Once we have received their delegations, committee will transition directly into the report and motion. Delegates, please be reminded that you have a maximum of 5 minutes and are encouraged to refrain from repeating what the other prior delegates have stated. Our first delegation for this item is Andrew Bolas. Andrew, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
Coming.
Chair. Mayor Easton, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Andrew Bowles. I'm a resident of the town of Lincoln, residing on Allen Court in Beansville. My wife and I are opposed to the requested zoning amendment on the northeast corner of Green Lane and Ontario Street. I submitted some comments on this matter some time ago. However, it has come to my attention, we've heard this evening, that some of the particulars regarding this project have changed. Namely, a change in the height, number of parking spaces, and corrections to some unfortunate oversights in the technical studies. We're still looking at 10 stories and 8 stories, regardless of how this project is sculpted. Notwithstanding these changes, my wife and I are opposed to the zoning amendment request, not because we are anti-development. On the contrary, not because we are in favor of smart development. Development like this, development respects the nature of our town and the parameters by which development happens in Lincoln. We are in favor of that type of development. Over the last couple of years, we have seen the characteristics of our town come under threat by developers who see green space as yet another opportunity to make communities like ours less discernible from the condo corridors of the GTA. The previous speaker himself said that he is involved in a number of projects like this around the greater Golden Horseshoe. With a 10-story feature, what we have before us is a proposal that still exceeds what is currently permitted by 66%, or 2/3, 4 stories, and 33%, or 1/3, on the remaining 8 floors of the project. And that's quite a difference. If the proponents came forward with a project in line with our official and secondary plans, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Instead, here we are. First, we're asked for 10 stories, but what's next? Our official and secondary plans must mean something. 119 units, more than what the current standard provides. That's what we're looking at. What is it about 10 or 8 stories that is the magic number for this project? Surely a 6-story development still provides opportunities for densification as prescribed by the provincial growth plan. The late David Kaplan, father of the Places to Grow plan referenced in the staff report and referenced this evening, was actually a colleague of mine. And I assure you that he did not envision small town Ontario being taken over by condos. I think we must question the assumptions that the applicant and their clients have utilized to come to the conclusion that a project of this height and size is feasible for the community, or never mind whether or not it's desirable. We already know that this project isn't for families, and it is not going to have affordability components to it. But I draw council's attention to the original transportation impact study that was submitted. I've been informed that an amended study has since been provided to correct some mistakes. Mistakes such as providing only 1 parking spot per unit. I note now that 401 spaces are planned for residential use for the 370 units. But if you take into consideration that a number of these units could be couples living together, the number of vehicles escalates very, very quickly, perhaps getting as high as 740 if both people in these couples have cars. And if you take into consideration friends and family visiting, that number grows even higher in an area that already struggles to accommodate vehicular, pedestrian, and bicycle traffic. And suggesting that self-regulation is going to happen in a project like this, I believe, is sadly naive. The previous version of the transportation impact study also makes incorrect reference to transit connectivity as a justification for this development. It claims on page 4 of that report that the closest GO train station is located south of Ontario Street and Clark Street in Grimsby, or approximately 8 kilometers west of the subject site. There is no such GO train station at that location. It's an old Via Rail station. There is no GO train station in Grimsby at all. And although Metrolinx has said that it may build a station in Grimsby someday, there is not one planned or being planned by Infrastructure Ontario, the infrastructure planning arm of the government of Ontario. And the Beansville GO train station is even further in the future. And as somebody who commuted every day to downtown Toronto for over 10 years, I wish that were not the case, but alas, it is. The issues like this may seem trivial. However, if something so obviously wrong as saying that there is a GO train station in Grimsby and utilizing that as part of the justification for this project can make its way into the documents submitted to the town, then what degree of trust can be placed in the rest of the supporting documents? And why should we, the residents of the town, have to live with that? We asked town council to send this application back to the drawing board and invite the applicants to come back with a proposal that is in line with our official and secondary plans, in line with that 6 stories, and is respectful of our town's character. The absence of built form is not an invitation to every developer to build, but sometimes the absence of built form lets a community breathe. Lincoln is not Toronto, Mississauga, or Burlington, and I don't believe we want to be. We are the Beansville Bench, 20 Valley, and the Niagara Escarpment. Let's keep it that way. Let's build here sensibly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bolus. I would almost think you practiced that in a mirror. It was just about exactly 5 minutes. Do members of council have any questions for our delegation? I see none. Thank you very much again. It's important to hear from residents in the community. Our next delegation for this item is Michael Clark. Michael Clark, are you there?
Let me just ask him to unmute here.
It's certainly challenging and difficult. So go to Mr.
Oh,
Ross.
there he is.
Was he? Okay, perfect. Mr. Clark, can you hear us?
Yes. Yes,
Well,
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
5 minutes.
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Okay, gentlemen, ladies. I would just like to thank you for allowing me to have this conversation. I was at the last Zoom, and there's a lot of things in that one that is still really should have been brought up again today. But I'd just like to touch on a couple of things that people haven't mentioned, and that was the Town of Lincoln official plan. The one that mentioned something about the Center of Excellence for Agriculture. And one of the community visions at that time, after being approached by the town, was that they valued the small town character. That's what they mentioned. And then the other one was enhancing the existing sense of place and small town character. This has been repeated over and over again. So really speaking, this abhorrence that's actually going up north of Green Lane is not what they were looking for. What they were looking for is a place away from the high rises, a place where they could actually breathe clean air and take their family for a walk and enjoy themselves. This is really upsetting for me because I actually live on the south side of Green Lane. I live next door to the property that has just been sold to someone else. Now, people talk about the reasons why we should go high rise is because that's a provincial mandate. Well, you really don't have to listen to them, do you? You have a mind of your own. And regarding the population growth of jobs and peoples in the area, if you listen to the region, they show you the guidelines of what they expect to see, or their guesstimates, actually, isn't it? Population growth is all guesstimates. This is an agricultural area, which we've talked about time and time again, meaning grapes, peaches, you name it, stone fruit. The thing is, if you're an agricultural worker in this area, you won't be able to afford these places. It's hard enough now, living in Beansville, I'm watching the taxes soar for nothing. Now, this, we got to remember, is a commuter town. That's what it is. Residents, as I say, move here to get away from the big city. They don't want these high rises. In actual fact, you really didn't want the high rises in this area, did you? Because if I can remember correctly, your idea of building was to start on the outskirts with low rise and gradually increase until you came to the city centre, which is where you were going to put your high rise. But Desantis developers, these are the guys, by the way, if you can remember, that was pushing Hamilton to get into the greenbelt so they could build. So, the more houses you put it up, the more profit you get. Its simple solution is to stop it. If you want to live in a healthy environment, refuse these developers. Four stories. That's all you need. 4, maybe 6. Because you're, as I said before in the last meeting, you're coming into a small town. You don't expect to say, oh my God, we're in Toronto, look at it. This is not on. I mean, let's face it, the gentleman that was representing Desantis mentioned something about the density of residents per hectare mandated by the province was 200.
Okay, Mr. Clark, we do truly appreciate your perspective. It's certainly a challenge, there's no doubt, and it's important. And we do, I certainly do value residents, saying what's on their mind, voicing their concerns, and we appreciate you coming this evening under these challenging technical times. Do members of council have any questions for Mr. Clark? Seeing none. Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Clark, for participating in your comments. Our next, our final delegation for this item is Ross Cronkright. Ross, please go ahead.
Hi, hear me okay?
Perfect. Thank you very much for coming.
Great. I'll keep it under 5. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thanks for hearing me tonight. In assessing the merits of this application, it is important to analyze what motivates this type of ask and how does it actually benefit the town. Firstly, however, I'd like to find some absolutes about this application. To mirror your comments, Mr. Deputy Mayor and Mr. Bowles previously, this application is to eclipse the zoning requirement of 6 stories in favor of 10 stories. And again, that's an ask of 68% beyond the current zoning height limits. Secondly, it is the developer's responsibility to justify the need for 10 stories, not the taxpayers or the town's burden to look for ways to approve it. And so far tonight, I don't think the gentleman from Urban Solutions has achieved that. The taxpayers have spent millions of dollars resulting in the assembly of growth plans and zoning bylaws structured to allow appropriate rate of growth and building sizing. Who assists in the research and advises on these growth and zoning plans? The answer is planning consultants. And now who is telling the town that ignoring these plans is a good idea by going to 10 stories? The answer is planning consultants. A little ironic. And lastly, the proposed provisions of community benefits that are being offered to the town in return for a favorable approval of this amendment are not really charitable concessions on the behalf of the developer. These same benefits would still be provided within the 6-story zoning limits. And actually, my gosh, I believe in the report, I read that one of the proposed community benefits is to pay an undisclosed large cash contribution as a community benefit. Now, I apologize with no disrespect, but this actually feels to me like pay extra money and you can build whatever you want. And rest assured, any of these costs associated with these added benefits will be folded into the overall project costs and blended into the sale unit price for each and every unit, all totally recoverable costs. So there isn't a lot of charity happening right there. So let me step back to my first statement in terms of motivation and community benefits. I see two motivating factors here with this application. The first one is a town that's motivated to grow and maintain pace with the surrounding areas. That's totally understandable and fine as long as it's within the established growth plans and zoning bylaws in place. The second one, unfortunately, is I see a developer who bought a poorly shaped piece of land fronting the CN train tracks, which leaves little to no footprint to achieve targeted profits, banking on the hope the town will allow them to recover those profits through a taller building. And then in terms of the community benefits, what we don't see here is, and it was mentioned earlier, the development that supports any housing shortages currently being realized, as 85% of the units are single bedroom and less than 700 square feet in size. And the remaining 15% of the units are only 2 bedroom. The result here is this building will merely be a commuter magnet residence with constant turnover. And as mentioned by a gentleman earlier, not really a way to build a community. We also don't see with this 10-story ask is a development that will provide protection of small town character or enhance a quaint town with welcoming entrances. Those two quotation statements are actually phrases that are embedded in the town's community growth plans, zoning bylaws, and website. This is dropping a 10-story bomb in the middle of the town, in essence, a wall that separates the town from the lake, similar to the erosion of vistas along other areas of the QEW. And nor do the aesthetics complement the town, going from a 10-story wall on one side of the street to single and 2-story homes on the other. The properly zoned 6-story version would create a more properly tapered transition to the homes across the street. So, in closing, I do understand the need to develop, especially along the areas on the Ontario Street corridor. However, increased development profit or developer profit is not a justification to increase building height by 68% over zoning. Increased development charge intake is also not a justification, as towns set yearly budgets on DC charge intake based on expected developments within the zoning limits. And finally, historically, amendment requests of this nature typically achieve 15% beyond the sitting bylaws, not 68. And in this case, that would be 1 additional floor, not 4. So allowing any more than this would certainly shine the light of leniency on the town of Lincoln as a place to be for uncontrolled growth. I duly apologize for that statement. I respect you all, but again, we're looking at a 60% growth ask. So the simple and clear conclusion here is not to abolish or block development, but to live by the rules already created and set in place to manage growth by capping this project at the 6-story limit. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Perfect timing. I was just about to give you a warning. Appreciate you coming this evening and providing your pretty concise thoughts and insights. Do members of council have any questions for Mr. Cronkright? Don't see any. Okay, thank you for your patience as well, Mr. Cronkright, and to all delegations, as you can appreciate the process that's involved with what we do here. In addition to the delegations, we have received written correspondence from Ian Wood, dated November 19th, 2021, Terry Morrison, dated November 21, 2021, Chris Julian, dated November 22nd, 2021, Joanne Cool, dated November 23rd, 2021, Andrew and Kara Bolas, dated November 23rd, 2021, and Thomas Gadsby, Beansville Pain Relief Chiropractic, dated November 28th, 2021, with respect to this item, which has been circulated to members of council. There being no further delegations or information for consideration, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva that council receive and file for information the following delegations and written correspondence regarding item 5.1, zoning bylaw amendment application by Urban Solutions Planning and Land Development Consultants. Andrew and Kara Bolas, JR I'm not sure if it's Junior Corey, Michael Clark, Ross Cronkrite, Ian Wood, Terry Morrison, Chris Julian, Joanne Cool, Thomas Gadsby, Beansville Pain Relief Chiropractic. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. And just to clarify, JR withdrew his application as his written submissions sufficed. So with that being said, Councillor Bernay.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Pachariba.
Yes.
Chair Mickley.
Yes.
Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Russell.
Yes.
Councillor Regima.
Yes.
Councillor Reimer.
Yes.
Mayor Easton. Thank you. That carries.
We will now move directly into item 5.1, report PD-52-21 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment application by Urban Solutions Planning and Land Development Consultants. Our manager of prudence and special projects will provide opening remarks to this report. Melissa, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to members of council and members of public. The purpose of tonight's public meeting and staff report PD 5221 is to provide committee members and members of public with background information and to hear input on the zoning bylaw amendment application that has been submitted for the proposed mixed-use development at Green Lane in Ontario. I would like to provide a quick summary of the planning context for this proposal, which has been touched on quickly tonight. The subject lands are located within the Beansville GO secondary plan area. The secondary plan was adopted by Town Council in 2018 and provides a vision and planning framework to guide the development of a complete community and support the long-term opportunity for a GO transit station. The secondary plan designates the subject site as mixed use on the west end and at the east end, parks and open space. It provides a maximum building height of 6 stories. The secondary plan includes provisions for additional height on a site-by-site basis in exchange for the provision of community benefits. The development proposal must represent good planning and must demonstrate that there are no negative impacts on adjacent properties. As mentioned by Matt Johnston in his presentation, the initial proposal was submitted in June and revised following public feedback received at the open house that was held in August, as well as through written correspondence that was sent to the town. Major concerns we heard from the public include the building size and height being too high, inadequate parking, and concerns with traffic congestion. We have heard this evening about the revisions to the proposal, which include reduced building height, the introduction of a 3-story podium, and increased parking spaces. Currently before the town is an application to amend the zoning bylaw to permit the proposed development. The zoning amendment seeks to add an open space zone at the east end of the site and increase maximum height to 10 stories, whereas the secondary plan permits a maximum of 6 stories. Other site-specific general commercial zoning amendments proposed include increasing the ground floor area, which is permitted to be occupied by dwelling units from 50% to 70% of the ground floor, permitting proposed flex units, permitting dwelling units along the front wall of the building along Green Lane, permitting a reduction in minimum residential unit sizes, and reducing the front yard setback from 3 meters to 1.5 meters. At tonight's meeting, staff are looking to gather further input from the public and committee on the revised development proposal. The staff report is for information purposes only, and no decisions have been made on this application, nor are any decisions required of committee tonight. Staff are available to answer any questions committee members may have this evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Melissa. Do members of council have any questions for Melissa to the report? Councilor Rinchema, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quite often when we look at these proposals, the discussion comes back around to density and what's required by the province, what's currently required, what may be required in the future. I mean, we hear that it's kind of a moving target. It's often a moving target. It is a moving target, and that's part of the challenge. But I don't know we talk about this a lot, but, and I know at one time we talked about doing something like, and I don't know if we ever did, but have we ever created a sort of if-then projection of if this development happened here and that development happened there, we would meet legislated density targets as currently required by the province? Have we ever seen that, in a visual? So we know, okay, we really do have to, achieve that there and that there and that there. If we don't, we're going to be in trouble in 10 years or whatever, or by whatever the targets are in 20 years. Have we ever done that?
Ms. Shi, you prefer or Ms. Shi? What's your preference?
Anything's fine. Yes.
Okay. All right, Melissa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So as referenced tonight, provincial legislation has been updated recently. So the growth plan has increased intensification targets, as well as now requires intensification targets to be set for strategic growth areas, of which Beansville Go area would qualify as one. So the region is currently updating their growth forecasts for the region and the town as part of its new official plan. And these growth forecasts are anticipated to increase. I would like to state that these are all minimum targets that we're talking about, and municipalities are encouraged to go beyond these minimum targets. With regard to your question, have we looked at what would be required by the province? Since these population forecasts are changing, we would need to see what the finalized numbers are from the region. And after we receive that, then the town can do further analysis on how this looks for the town, and if anything would have been changed since the secondary plan was approved in 2018.
Okay, question of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I know the targets are moving all the time, and when we get the final numbers in for the region, we can look then. But I think it would, I don't know if I've ever, it's like a visual. I'm a visual person. If I could see a visual, like a map of the whole municipality and what's required where, if we did this, if we did that, this is what's currently proposed. This is what's currently required right now. And therefore we have to achieve these targets here, these targets here, these targets here. I know that's going to change, but that could be also updated as we go. So I don't know if if we've ever created something like that, a visual where we can quickly have a look as decision makers and say, oh yeah, I think we really better do this here or else we're going to be in trouble. And then when things change a little bit down the road, we change a little bit more. We adjust to what targets we have to meet and what requirements have changed, and we have another look at it.
Certainly, we hear a lot about projections, but I see Mr. Bruder, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just add a little bit to Melissa's previous answer. When we go through exercises like the official plan, the secondary plans, we do kind of identify different densities, as you all know. We do it for certain areas, certain land uses. So we're always, looking at what's permitted in terms of those, what could be. We look at that not just in terms of growth numbers necessarily and meeting growth targets, because as Melissa said, it's not necessarily the goal just to meet those targets and that's it. There's a lot more that goes into it than that, but we also look at these types of things too. When we look at some of the infrastructure upgrades that are needed, we use that to forecast what we could see in any given area and what the anticipated upgrades could be needed in those areas to the existing infrastructure. But again, it's one of those things where it's not necessarily tied in with, okay, this property needs to be exactly this and that to meet the plan, because or to meet the growth targets, because as we've all heard tonight, they are in flux. The targets have gone up since the growth plan before the 2020 version was the 2017 version. They went up fairly significantly from one to the other, and those are only 3 years apart. So things are changing rapidly. We are constantly looking to update. But another thing too that I just want to highlight for everybody, I've heard a lot about secondary plans and zoning bylaws, and okay, yeah, we've got them in place, so that's it. We're good here. And I think that can be a little bit difficult to achieve just because for the reasons we've outlined. Planning, especially lately, has been very dynamic. And just because we have secondary plans in place, yes, they do provide guidelines, they do provide parameters, but at the end of the day, if planning applications come in and there's merit to those, and there's still meeting of the overall intent and the provisions within those plans, it's our responsibility to take them in, bring them in front of you for a fulsome discussion like we are today, and move forward accordingly. So, I know that there's a sentiment out there sometimes that, we've got these in place and that should be enough to just, hold specifically to that. But that's not always the case in the context of ever-changing provincial policy landscape and the recent focus on growth, but also just in terms of using our land as efficiently as we can. Because quite frankly, when we look at the town of Lincoln as a whole, there's not too many pieces to develop in any significant built form. It's just, there's not that many places, just with us being constrained by other policy areas. So those are just some additional comments I wanted to make. I hope they're helpful. Thanks.
Yes, helpful. Thank you. Well, yeah, there's a lot to consider, but again, it always seems to go back to there's these targets that we have to meet at by the province. And I'm not sure we completely understand that. I think there could be sort of a digital version of an interactive, updatable visual that we could all look at on a regular basis and say, if this happened here, if this happened there, if that happened there. I think it's possible to do it. And I think that would help us all a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, likely to Mr. Bruder or Ms. Shi, either one. I'm just wondering, again, kind of piggybacking on Councillor Gemma's questions about numbers and plans. Again, recently we saw some of the long-term projections on growth for Lincoln that I believe came down from the region that were cascaded down from the province. And again, we kind of went around the horn trying to decipher and make some sense of them. I don't think anybody on staff or on council was able to actually pinpoint of how those numbers were brought up or what conclusions they came to increase our numbers from now, I think, until 2050 sometime. So if we're going based strictly on what is being dictated down to us by the upper tiers of municipality or upper tiers of government, what's the point of having a secondary plan in the first place? I know that looking back, we've heard it from the presenter that our plans are likely outdated because they were created some years ago. But in the same frame, like we have not had any progress at all, as far as I'm concerned, as far as a GO train goes. So I think the merits of even determining whether or not a GO train secondary plan is even required, based on what's happened with the government and the funding changes, the model, the pandemic, the changes of the workforce migration. There's a lot of things that kind of have to get factored in. So I'm just wondering, like, is the need for a secondary plan a requirement going forward? What level of comfort or I guess what level of security should council put into those secondary plans if we're always going to adhere to those upper levels of government?
An interesting question, Deputy Mayor. Melissa.
Actually, Mr. Chair, if I could add a couple of comments first. I think that's a good question as well, and I can understand why you're bringing it forward. I think what we're doing here, though, is we're ignoring some of the other factors of what's in a secondary plan. And we're commenting here a lot about density. Yep, there's additional height. That's another one. Those are two things in a document that's very comprehensive on a variety of other themes. When we talk about urban design, we talk about the types of uses, mixed use being an important one. We talk about more efficient use of land, how we lay out the trail network, how we plan for infrastructure upgrades. All of these are included in secondary plans as well. Design guidelines for how, these types of land uses are going to address the street. And there's a general intent that goes through a secondary plan. I mean, you are correct that there are some, things here that are maybe deviating a little bit from what was actually listed in the secondary plan, but these types of documents are not always to be considered 100% gospel. But at the end of the day, there's a bunch of different ingredients that are included within those secondary plans to really contribute towards a cohesive community in that area. So while I can appreciate, yeah, we are seeing some additional densities over what we, envisioned maybe even just a few years ago. It's not unusual among any municipalities experiencing growth. And we are still maintaining our approach in all of those other facets of a secondary plan. So I would definitely maintain that they are important planning considerations, even notwithstanding some proposed increases in density.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bruder. Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Melissa, are you satisfied with Mr. Bruder's answer?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to add a few more points. In addition to what Mr. Bruder said, yes, the secondary plan is a lot more than just providing building heights and units. It outlines a vision for the area of where to grow. So the secondary plan does focus a lot of growth north of Green Lane, in recognition that there is low density existing established neighborhoods south of Green Lane. It looks at, as Mr. Bruder said, urban design guidelines. It considers what is compatible development. So an important component to ensuring if a development is compatible is not only height, but the built form and the massing, to ensuring that there's appropriate setbacks and step backs, mitigating any adverse impacts to adjacent properties. So the secondary plan provides significant guidelines and policies with respect to those as well.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Yep. So in the presentation or in the report, there is a shot, I believe it's Appendix A, where it shows the angular vision from with the 9 to 10 stories, 4 to 5 stories. I'm wondering if you can just give me a quick walkthrough of what this slide is showing us and how, again, the proximity of the building to Green Lane and the future impact of the widening, how it's impacted in the approval of this development.
Melissa, do you have the report in front of you?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I could speak to this angular plane analysis. So this is one of the design guidelines in the secondary plan that provides that any buildings that are higher than 5 stories should have an angular plane setback, which is shown in the red line on that appendix. So that's taken at 80% of the width of the right of way. And the purpose of the angular plane is, sorry, 1 second. So the purpose of the step backs in the angular plane is to ensure that the perceived building height is reduced at the upper levels from view of the street. So when you're walking on the street, the building is human scaled at grade. And doesn't look like an imposing, towering 8-story plus building. And so the resulting building facade massing presents more like in this situation, a 6-8-story building. So the drawing shown does show the building impeding the build 2 line, which would be the red line. And according to the secondary plan, with additional step backs at the 8th through 10th floor, then you'll achieve a minimization of privacy issues. So the upper stories, if it were set back further, then you would reduce the perceived and actual overlook into the front and rear yards of the residents across the street on Green Lane, as well as help to protect sky views and access to sunlight, both from Green Lane and from the residents south of Green Lane.
Okay, thank you. A follow-up, Mr. Chair. So right now, the building as designed does not meet our requirements.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair McLick. 2 questions, one very similar to Councilor Ranjima and Councilor Russell regarding density. Through you, Chair McLick, to Ms. Shi or to, and correct me if the numbers are wrong, 296 units per hectare is what's being proposed. And our current the current provincial standard is 200. Do we have a sense of of, or do we feel that that will be above or below the, the stage to come, or the, the current provincial initiative, where that's going? Do we have a sense of where that's going to sit? Is it going to sit above or below that?
Melissa?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So the guidelines in the secondary plan that we have, the maximum densities, which is 200 units per hectare for this site, should meet the provincial standards, yes. So the excess density of 296 units per hectare should exceed that.
It'll exceed that, but are we not talking about new provincial standards coming in, or new numbers possibly that have come up since that has written? Do we know whether this 296 will be above or below those projected numbers?
I anticipate that it would still be above. The preliminary regional intensification target for the Beansville GO station area would be a density of a minimum of 125 people per hectare.
People per hectare or units?
People and jobs per hectare. Yes.
Excuse me,
okay, and how does that translate to units? So I'm just trying to keep it. There's been a lot of discussion from residents and from the public about the density, and so just so we can keep it in a, is it possible to keep it in a common, metric? So we're dealing with units per hectare. Is there any way we can transfer that to units per hectare?
It's difficult to do right at the top of my head, but as I said before, the proposal should exceed the regional density targets.
Ones that are projected. Okay, thank you. And a second question, if I may, Councilor Mickley.
Absolutely.
To Mrs. Shi, or to Ms. Shi, sorry, or to Director Bruder, the POP space, the privately owned, publicly used space. How does that, once that's in place, who maintains that? Who looks after it? Assuming it's going to connect with a sidewalk that would, run east along Green Lane eventually. Where do we take over? The town take over? Is there liability? How does that all look, or is that still to be determined?
Melissa?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Nothing's been determined yet. We've been having ongoing discussion with the applicant on this proposal, and the idea is that the condo corporation would own and assume the space, as well as maintain it and take out insurance for liability on the space as well. So it would be accessible to the residents of the development as well as to members of the public.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shi. Thank you, Councilor Mickley.
Thank you, Councilor Renner. Councilor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Mickley. I am having some connection issues with freezing up. I hope I can get through this without any issues. Through you to staff, to either Mr. Bruder or Ms. Shi. So quite often, when we see applications all the time, we have a holding provision. And I've never really, quite frankly, understood the leverage of those and how we hold those to the, to the law. I just sometimes think they're thrown in there. I never know what happens with them. But in this particular case, I think this is critical. We hear all the time from our residents, that we've got one entrance into our town, we've got one exit off the highway, and that's Ontario Street. And we know that Ontario Street is a regional road. And we know that Ontario Street needs to be upgraded by the region at some point, in some time, with regards to sanitary sewers from Green Lane to King Street. That's a considerable project which will involve design as well as funding, budgeting, and then construction. So I'm reading through you, Chair, in the report that there is a holding provision and the wording says in the report, may be implemented. Our residents are saying quite often when I talk to them, they're not against development, but they're always saying, does our infrastructure support development? We know in this particular case that our infrastructure doesn't support it. We know we need to upgrade it. So what discussions are happening behind the scenes that we're not privy to with this proponent that would indicate that he's not putting a shovel in the ground until we are absolutely certain that our infrastructure supports that? And if that's 2024, 2025, 2026, that's when he starts. Could I get a comment on that?
Melissa.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. With respect to the infrastructure upgrades that will be required, we have identified that in the medium to long term, we will need an upgrade to the regional sanitary sewer north of Green Lane. So there is still some capacity in that sanitary sewer. So what's being determined right now is if there's sufficient room in that sanitary sewer to accommodate this proposal. If there is, then a holding provision wouldn't be needed. But if it's been determined that there isn't sufficient capacity in that pipe right now, then we would recommend that a holding provision be included, which would prevent any development from occurring on the site until adequate servicing is available. So this staff will confirm this prior to recommendation on the proposed application.
Councilor Brunet.
Yeah. So on the same through you, Chair, on the same, thought process, as council, we've talked about the widening of Green Lane, and we've got it in our budget to widen Green Lane from Lincoln Avenue to the roundabout to the site of the new high school. But we also know we have pinch points all along Green Lane as you head east towards Ontario Street and then beyond from Ontario Street to Bartlett through Carriage Gate and through those areas. So again, same question. To the residents that continue to say that they're concerned about traffic and congestion and parking and that our infrastructure doesn't support it, what are we doing as a municipality to put the brakes on to ensure that a shovel in this project, in this development, does not go in the ground until we absolutely know that infrastructure supports it?
I see our CAO's hand is up. I'm gonna allow him to chime first, or Mr. Bruder has raised his hand as well.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik. I just wanted to make some comments specific to the previous question the councillor asked and highlight that we are in regular contact, staff are, with Niagara Region. And I know as part of the 2022, should be completed in Q1 actually of 2022, there is a master servicing plan that is being undertaken. And the region is aware and keeping an eye on all the developments. So both Public Works and planning staff are communicating regularly with their counterparts at the region. And so the region is aware and keeping an eye on whether or not the projects need to be incorporated. So I do want to provide council that I think that comfort that those conversations are happening, the region's aware of it. Similarly, and I think Mr. Bruder will touch on this, the improvements on both sides of Ontario from a roads perspective that need to actually happen. But I'll let Matt chime in on that.
Mr. Bruder, go ahead quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to dovetail off of that. Yeah, obviously a lot of ongoing dialogue with respect to servicing along Ontario Street for a variety of reasons, looking at it fulsomely and working with the region. We have some upgrades that are, we're currently planning for design, also looking to coordinate with the region on kind of their piece that's further to the south, kind of towards the end of Ontario, or further to the north, sorry, towards the end of Ontario, near, getting past Green Lane. But anyway, another thing from a traffic perspective that I'd like to highlight is, obviously with a development like this, they've submitted a traffic impact study that looked at, their development and other ones that are coming online soon, such as New Horizon. It incorporated that as well, the Utopia development, to make sure that the road system could handle the development. But we're going to be going one step further as well. We're going to be looking at things fulsomely. We've been working with the region, working with a modeling consultant too, just on traffic patterns in the area, looking at things fulsomely. We all know we've been seeing some recent development concepts in the area, so we want to make sure we're capturing all of those potentials as well. So taking a step back, looking at it first in terms of the development, but also taking into account the complete picture. We're looking to coordinate this work. We're doing it as we speak So concurrent to this application kind of making its way through the process, we're hoping to have some more, well, we will have some more additional information on that shortly to try to further supplement this discussion. But in terms of what can happen and can't happen in terms of the developer, Melissa mentioned the holding provisions. Those are tools really that allow us to make sure that we are being diligent with respect to consideration of these items and making things such as sanitary capacity, making sure that the system can handle it before it actually goes through. So those are things, once they meet staff's requirements to lift those holding provisions, it comes again to council to remove those provisions. So those are some additional comments. Thanks.
Councilor Brunei?
Yeah, Chair, I appreciate all the comments from the CAO and from the Director of Planning. I appreciate, respect them. I only make these comments because, as a council, we have these applications coming before us. We have the residents that are expressing and communicating their concerns. At the end of the day, we are a lower tier government. We depend on the region to move some of these projects ahead. And, we all know what's happened previous this year. We were told in 2007, when public engagement got done for King Street to redevelop a regional road 81 and also into Vineland, and we were told work was happening, and now we're told it's delayed. So with all due respect, all I'm saying, my concerns are, we have a developer here with an application, trying to fast track to put a shovel in the ground. And I'm not against development, but I have concerns about infrastructure. And I really hope, dialogue with the region, I'm not so confident. And I'm not trying to be negative. I'm not trying to throw any daggers at anybody. I just think we owe it to the residents of this municipality to ensure that our infrastructure is up to speed before any applications are processed. And I appreciate the opportunity, Chair. Thank you.
Appreciate your honest thoughts and considerations with this. Councillor Pachariva.
Thanks, Chair Mikulik. And I was, you know what, Councillor Brunei kind of stole a little of my thunder there, because I had this all highlighted on page 18 of the report, where it says the town will not permit development to be constructed until the necessary infrastructure is in place. I highlighted that. I said that's a key aspect. So not only does the regional sanitary sewers on Ontario Street north of Green Lane need to be upgraded, but there's also a water transmission line on Green Lane that needs updating. And these are saying 2023. Councillor Brunei and myself have, been part of public consultations on the rebuilding of King Street from Lincoln Avenue to the roundabout. We were told it was going to take place before the new high school was built. We've been waiting 7 years for that. So maybe there is some timeline here. Maybe things aren't imminent and we're allowed to get them right. So question with respect to the report to Mr. Bruder or Ms. Shi. So Green Lane's going to be widened as part of this project. Will the existing on-street parking be removed and replaced by the lay-by parking? And if that's the case, whose responsibility is the lay-by parking for winter maintenance? Because we've heard that sometimes can be a operational nightmare. So might be best case scenario, but when it comes down to operational, does it work?
Ms. Shi, go ahead. You have a response.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the design of the Green Lane urbanization and improvement has not been undertaken as of yet, but we have been in early discussions with the applicant about the proposed lay-by parking. And the proposal would be to remove the lay-by parking on the south side and replace it with the dedicated on the side of the street parking on the north side. And that would be within the town's right of way. So I anticipate that it would be plowed and maintained by the town.
Okay, very good. So then that means the new winter control bylaws will apply to that going forward. Okay.
Yes, correct.
Thank you very much. And then another concern to it, and if I may, and again, it's raised by residents. So these infrastructure upgrades, be it water transmission, be it sanitary sewer, concerns with who's paying for that. So is development charges funding these upgrades?
Is she?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the upgrades that are required due to growth and development will be paid for by development charges. As for the green lane improvements, a lot of these improvements that we're talking about fronting the subject application is required by this specific development and would be funded by the applicant directly. And anything that's not required specifically for this development would be funded through development charges.
Okay.
So it would not be a taxpayer cost for what we're talking about.
Okay, fantastic. And just one of the other issues too that came up in the one of the written submissions, and it was about, and again, I understand the privacy issues and blotting out people's emails, but you know, you see some of these concerns and you want to be able to respond to them. So this is the forum, I guess, that we respond to. So the reason that we instituted the insurance is that every homeowner is responsible for their water and sewer connection that run from the town's portion laterally to the house. So we had sat in on a seminar at AMO a few years ago when you could meet in person. And these costs can escalate into the thousands of dollars. So this insurance has been done by the city of Hamilton and various other municipalities around Ontario. We thought it was a good idea to help protect the homeowner. It's not about protecting the town. It's about protecting you, the homeowner, in case you're faced with these issues. So just wanted to clarify that. And my last question to the staff report was again with respect to affordability. So is there a provision in here for affordable units and not, you know, not in the realm of is $300,000 affordable, but true affordable units to help get people off that Niagara Regional Housing wait list and have those conversations taken place with the region?
Is she? Affordability, has that been discussed?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So affordability is not part of the applicant's proposal. We have been in discussion with them on this and the possibility of including some sort of affordable housing aspect as part of possible community benefits. So it is an ongoing discussion that we are currently having.
Okay, that's good to hear, Ms. Shee, because I mean, that's again, you know, you know, the limit's 6 floors or 6 stories. I mean, there needs, in my humble opinion, there needs to be an affordability aspect to this in order to exceed those limits that we set. So thank you.
Mary Easton, I see your hand is up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go back to one of the fundamentals that pretty much positions us in terms of how much land is available to be developed. And so my question is, this first question is to Ms. Shee, and it has to do with the Greenbelt and the NEC plan and how much land, if there was absolutely nothing built in Lincoln, how much land would we start with? And then, but first I want to speak about a meeting that was held last week at the region regarding boundaries. And it was made very clear that the town of Lincoln would have no changes in our boundaries. In fact, our boundaries as they stood were reconfirmed. And that implied, and they were very specific, that all growth would continue, be expected within our boundaries, that job creation, the jobs per hectare would have to occur within our boundaries. Whereas other municipalities have been making applications for boundary adjustments, we are not able to do that because of our green belt and the NEC plan. So Ms. Shi, could you speak to that limitation and what it means? Because I can tell you that may not be coming directly to this council, but Councillor Foster and I are certainly getting a very strong lobby, and it's been going on for well over a year now, on land uses, on footprint, on natural spaces and the issues of linkages. So we have to begin here because this is what places the limitation on us in the first place. And then the provincial directives begin to us as the regulators. So what can we tell people about our situation in that regard?
She.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mayor Easton. Yes, the town has significant amount of greenbelt area, approximately 2/3 of the landmass, so 60%, 66% of the town's land area is protected by greenbelt policy and Niagara Escarpment policy. So as a result, across the town, our population growth will need to be focused within very limited urban areas. This does require more efficient use of land and overall compactness. One of these areas is the Ontario Street Intensification Corridor and the Beansville GO Transit Station area, which we are discussing today. And it's for these reasons as well that the secondary plan encourages the development of a complete community with higher intensity built forms to reduce land consumption and maximize the use of our servicing and infrastructure, as well as to contribute towards life cycle and affordable housing options.
Okay, so when we do that, then we really have no other choice but to go up. Where else would we go? If we can't sprawl, where else can we go?
Yes, exactly.
For you to,
is that a question or is that?
Yes, where can we go? It's not rhetorical.
Yes, so there would be nowhere else to go. The intent of these policies are also to protect our stable neighborhoods, to direct growth and intensification where there's opportunity to do so.
Okay, now, Mr. Chairman, we speak a great deal about retaining youth and creating jobs, and our Center of Excellence for Agriculture, which requires a great deal of skilled labor. We talk about over 80% of the skilled labor for the skilled trades leaving the workforce in the next 8 years now. It was 10 years, now we're down to 8 years. And so if we don't have housing, then how can we attract people into our community? People are living longer, and so maybe houses aren't turning over as frequently. So where are those people going to come from, and how will we satisfy the demands of a large number of employees who certainly are pretty vocal about their need for skilled trades? What are we looking at there? And I'm going to maybe go to the CAO to answer that question. You may have a more broader view, Mr. Chairman, but certainly this is a challenge.
I will put that question to the CAO, as I feel this is a question that's being asked in just about every municipality in Ontario. Mr. CAO.
Through Mr. Chair, I think maybe take an attempt to answer it. And you're right, it is a question that I think all of us are dealing with. And that isn't just the Niagara phenomena. I think everybody's hearing it. And maybe to go back to the previous comment, you're right. I think when you look at large scale policies at a federal level and even at a provincial level, whether they be immigration or otherwise, people are coming to Canada. Canada is a very desirable community and country in which people want to make their home. And when you take that on a micro scale, you start seeing people wanting to move to Ontario, Southern Ontario, the ability to be near things, the ability to be near the border. You look at Niagara on even a more micro scale, and I think Niagara, because it has a lot of green space, becomes incredibly attractive. I think in a lot of ways, we've become incredibly used to our community, used to the amount of green space. I would say that COVID has, exacerbated the need for green space, and I think we heard that. And so I think, the question around growing up versus growing out, simply saying no is really not an option. If there was, I think in a lot of cases, and I can assure you, putting aside the planning paradigm and the planning principles that Melissa and Matt have to adhere to, I think at times we'd all love to say no. That's just not, from a staff perspective, what we can do. And so I think when applications come in, we do assess it. We do look at things. Melissa highlighted, and as did the mayor, the comments around 2/3 of our landmass being protected by the Greenbelt. And what's left of that 1/3, and I know you've heard me all say this before, what's left of that 1/3 though, is also protected under the NEC and a number of other bodies, organizations, and statutes. And so when you look at where we can develop and the debate happening across anywhere in the Golden Horseshoe and beyond, and I know people say, well, we're not Toronto and Mississauga. I don't think by any means anybody is suggesting that, but the debate around growing up or growing out remains. And so I don't think anybody in our community and staff are not recommending advocating changing the Greenbelt so that we can grow out and have less density. So density becomes one of those decision points that we need to look at in terms of what's appropriate and not appropriate. Jobs and the ability to attract youth and what youth want. And we hear that whether it be on the conversation of how they move around the community. I've been at a number of ward meetings where people want us to attract a trampoline park and a whole bunch of other things around the table. Those often come when you hit that sweet spot in terms of people coming to your community. Businesses come where people are located. And I think we're starting to see that as businesses come to our community. So it's not just a decision that's made in isolation in terms of one variable. We hear about the Center of Excellence for Agriculture. We will always be a farming community. Those are our roots. Yes, we're changing. Yes, we have a very diversified economy, but we also have large manufacturers. And I think about the conversations we're having recently and we'll be having tomorrow in terms of a groundbreaking around an industrial park, around attracting those particular jobs. So, while I probably, I'm going on a little bit longer and trying to answer that question, I don't have a specific answer, Mary, to your question, other than to say, I think all these variables, whether they be youth employment, whether they be employment generally, whether they be the conversations we're having with the Employment Help Center or other organizations in terms of decisions that council is faced with. These are all variables that we take into consideration when we look at a development. It is about having those conversations and making sure that we're protecting and adhering to council's policies, but at the same time, finding that balance. And so I think the comments tonight, are good comments. They're important comments. And I think they're things that we need to take back when we have conversations with this particular developer who, I'm sure is listening and will likely want to make some tweaks to their proposal.
Okay, thank you very much.
Response to
that's very helpful information. Mr. Chairman, I do
just if I may, we have several hands up, and if we could keep the questions to the report itself. I know that this is pretty new, this sort of development within the town of Lincoln, but if we could keep the questions geared more towards the report and specific answers or specific questions requiring answers. As we're kind of wandering into general policy and general Ontario policy, which is not.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, this is exactly what my concern is, that when we don't look at the impact of development as a whole, and we look at one development and one set of numbers, what we do is we completely miss the point in terms of the development of the community as a community. And so I won't aggravate your ire any further, but I think that is exactly the point. And we have been looking at these individual developments piecemeal. And when I start looking at the impacts since the very beginning of really the growth in this community, which really started back post-World War II, there are many things that have not changed. And sure, there's a big concern about this particular growth, but we have had growth here forever. So when people tell me that they came to the area because it was this, that, or the other thing, this community has always been in a state of growth, and it has always been to the benefit of the community. So I don't want us to forget about some of those really important elements, but I also don't want to create any angst for yourself. This is a big meeting for you to chair and to maintain control of. So, but I will bring these items up again, because I feel that they also need attention in terms of the bigger picture. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mary Easton. And I certainly appreciate your comments and your thoughts. I appreciate everyone's comments and thoughts. It's just, this is these sorts of developments of this magnitude with this sort of resident engagement they're challenging for all of us. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just two quick questions. One is with regards to the POPs and to the staff. And I know you're doing some investigation. You know, this is new, certainly new to me. This concept, and it sounds like it's new to you as well. But I'm just wondering how this really works over time. And you know, just the thought of a condominium a corporation, you know, paying for maintenance, paying for insurance, and yet the public is able to use this space. You know, if I'm on the board of that condominium, I'm questioning why we're investing, you know, our money into a public place. So I know you're looking into that, and I hope that you know, you can come back with some feedback from communities that may have this. Again, I would hope that it's coming from high density locations, that this is not about a 12 or 14, you know, townhome, you know, condominium complex where the public is able to walk through and things like that. But I hope it's something of similar ilk to this. The other comment I would have, and I would go back to the commercial piece, and in our Beansville Go Transit Station secondary plan, we make the statement that a key policy objective is the incorporation of commercial uses on the ground floor of buildings close to the front property line in order to help frame and animate the street. And my question to the staff is, what does that look like for you when evaluating a building of this size, of this location? What does commercial on the ground floor look like to you? Through you, Mr. Chair, and
Mr. Shi, or Ms. Shi, sorry.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So mixed use along this corridor, how we envisioned it in the secondary plan is a storefront right up close to the property line to create an active street level, to have retail activity that's accessible by walking, biking. It creates a vibrant, connected environment. It has access right in off the street, so the access is from Green Lane or Ontario, not from internal within the site, with possibility for front yards that would allow for patio spaces, retail signage, things like that. Just to basically animate the street.
Thank you, Melissa. Music to my ears. You know, that is exactly what, you know, I think we should be looking for, you know, in this very, you know, important location. I mean, it's in our intensification corridor, and to look at, you know, 2 or maybe 3 units well off of Ontario Street, you know, it looks to me like, the developers knows that he's got to do it, but is doing, you know, as little as he can possibly do. So I'm looking for much more than what we're seeing. And as I said in the comments, you know, I would be looking for this building to move closer to the sidewalk and be, you know, butt up with the sidewalk. So it's easy to jump out of a car and go to the commercial piece right there. You know, otherwise, if you're having to, you know, cross lawns or, you know, go down sidewalks, it doesn't present itself as exciting, and, you know, it doesn't give that potential purchaser or customer easy access. So those are my two items with regards to the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 2 points of clarification. One, I want to go back to the infrastructure costs associated with bringing this development online. Ms. Shi had mentioned that it would be covered by the DC charges. I just want to get a clarification that it would be wholly covered by the DC charges contributed from this development.
Ms. Shi? Oh, sorry. Did you?
No, that's
you with that thought?
Yep, no, that's it. That's
Okay.
that first one.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So each infrastructure project would have to be looked at independently to see what the contribution is to what's required by the development that's coming forward, and what benefits the existing community. So there could be a proportion of the servicing upgrade or infrastructure upgrade that is a benefit to the existing community. If so, then that portion would not be covered by development charges. But anything that's determined to be driven by development would be covered either through development charges or specifically by the applicant.
Okay, so clarification, from the development charges from this development, not the pool of development charges, but the actual ones coming in from this, factoring in that there could be CIP reduction down the road if I'm assuming they will apply.
So how development charges and the Development Charges Act work is that development charges, the funds that are received are pooled into a fund, and that fund is used to fund the cost of the infrastructure improvements. So it doesn't work on a site-by-site and project-specific basis, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm just wondering, like, is the cost for this to come online going to be higher than what they are contributing in terms of development charges? That's where my concern is, where I think residents would be concerned about. But it sounds like we're not going to get to that answer today, or the answer may be a no. My other question through you, Mr. Chair, is going back to the widening of Green Lane and the addition of those parking spaces on the north side of Green Lane. I think Ms. Shi had mentioned that I know that the Green Lane development, the Green Lane plan has not yet been completed on that side, but that there will be a loss of parking spaces, it sounds like, on the south side in order to have the parking on the north side thrown in there. Will that parking be allowed to have a traditional overnight parking by the residents that live on the south side of Green Lane, like they've been using for years and years and years? Or will there be like a timed requirement for the parking where they'd be more accustomed for the quick turnover for customers coming into those businesses associated with the development?
Yes, so to answer your question, Deputy Mayor. Yes, we haven't designed Green Lane yet, but staff have heard concerns with the existing on-street parking and the challenges that the residents face there with respect to safety and the danger of how it's currently laid out. So the proposal for the on-street parking on the north side is an opportunity to make the situation safer and possibly also address the on-street parking needs of the area. So we'd have to look into what appropriate on-street parking measures there would be for the area, and if we would allow nighttime parking by the residents, but that's something that we would look into and undertake consultation on as we design Green Lane.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have just a question or two of my own. If I could have Councilor Brunei take the chair for a brief moment.
Go ahead, Chair Mikulik, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to Ms. Shi, just curious with regards to the parking, are the spaces standard size? What size are the spaces that are proposed? Has there been any relief sought in the side?
Through you, Chair, no relief has been requested for the parking sizes, so they would conform to our town requirements.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And if I may just comment a little bit to the parking and the concerns that I have that, when trying to see who's going to be buying these sorts of places, my guess is that if it's going to be a young family or a young couple buying one, both family members will most likely have to work requiring 2 cars. So the one spot or one in a bit spots per unit, I have a concern as far as how people are going to be able to afford to buy these units if they are 2 family members working to be able to afford them as they're currently proposed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councilor Brunei.
Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Okay. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Pachariva. Council received for information report PD-52-21 regarding zoning bylaw amendment application by Urban Solutions Planning and Land Development Consultants, and direct staff to prepare a recommendation report once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councilor Renee?
Yes.
Councilor Pachariva?
Yes.
Chair Mikulik?
Yes.
Councilor McPherson?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Russell?
Yes.
Councilor Rajima?
Yes.
Councilor Reimer?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's time. That was quite the meeting with regards to that agenda item. It's tough sourcing this sort of housing or any sort of housing within town that's affordable, that's especially given the market and the times. I had a request for a bathroom break. Over 2.5 hours is straw poll with hands. Anybody want to take a bathroom break? 5 minutes? Perfect. Okay. I got 8:39 on my computer, say 8:49, 8:45.
Thank you.
45 work. All right, perfect. See